Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today, I'm really excited to be speaking with Adam Nicholls. Adam, welcome.
Thank you very much, Dan. Great to be here.
Yeah, super excited to have you on. Why don't we start by getting you to introduce yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience?
Okay, I'm currently a professor of sports psychology at the University of Hull. Prior to that, I completed an undergraduate degree at University of Leeds and a master's in sports science at Leeds Beckett University. So I've been doing research. Predominantly, it started around stress and coping among international adolescent golfers. Then I moved into stress and coping in professional rugby union. And then in the last few years, I started doing doping research or anti-doping research, developing educational programs to kind of promote clean sport.
And so, you mentioned that you started off in golf, so music to my ears, having played golf and being a pro golfer. But what's your sporting background, mate? Is it sort of a range of sports or a single sport that you played or coached or anything like that?
Yeah, so I started off playing tennis. So I played as county champion at tennis, went
Oh,
down to some of
nice.
the national competitions, but unfortunately, yeah, didn't do too well. So I started playing golf, got down to five.
Nice.
And now currently I compete in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I'm actually competing at the British Open at Loughborough University on Sunday. So I'm looking forward to that.
Wow, that's amazing. So
Yeah,
I'd like to go there in a second, actually.
yeah.
But you mentioned tennis, starting with tennis. We're actually recording a day after Emma Raducanu
Ah,
reached the final of the US Open. What's your thoughts there, mate? That's just.
yeah.
I wrote a little bit about this on LinkedIn, that I think the popular consensus is she's come from nowhere, but actually a little bit of exploration is she had a pretty good
Yeah,
junior record,
yeah,
as so often these players who come out of nowhere tend to have. But just, she's a qualifier at the US Open, and she's got through to the US Open final. When this is broadcast, this episode, we'll know the actual result of the final. But what's your thoughts on
yeah.
that giant leap she's made?
I just think it's absolutely amazing. I think I was reading that she actually had 18 months off from competitive tennis. And it makes you wonder, that time was clearly spent, really fine tuning probably her game, her fitness, probably the mental side. And you just think she's probably really benefited from that, and just what a talent she is, and what clearly to be able to compete at that level. And then when I've seen her play and I've watched interviews, she just looks like she's having so much fun out there and really enjoying it, doesn't she?
She certainly uses phrases and terms that are music to the ears of any sports psychologist. Like, I'm just out here controlling the controllables, and I'm just focused on myself. And then I listened to an interview this morning from last night where she said, she answered a question about expectation. She said, "Well, look, I'm a qualifier. I've got no expectation." And as a sports psychologist, I suppose we're thinking of locus of control, and we're thinking of managing expectations and orienting towards the process and tasks, and also, Adam, fascinating what you said there about taking 18 months off, and you just wonder if she really immersed herself in mastery during that time, and therefore, because she wasn't competing, she was able to focus on mastery, and the competition side wasn't infiltrating her mindset, orienting towards the ego and worrying about
Yeah.
results. I think that's a really interesting point you've made there.
Yeah, I think it'll be. I guess in the passage of time, it'll come out.
Mm.
What happened during those 18 months, and maybe what we or coaches, other tennis players, can learn in the future about that. But yeah, I just think it's absolutely amazing. I know she booked her flight home for the day after qualifiers or something. So I guess she's just playing without expectation at the moment, and and loving life and really enjoying it. So, and she looks like she's born to be there, really.
And it would be interesting with that expectation. I suppose the fascinating thing is she's up against a 19-year-old Canadian who probably has little expectation as well.
As
So it's
well,
the battle
yeah.
of the no expectation players.
It is, and it's probably a great mindset to be in.
Mm. Certainly, potentially frees you up and helps you engage in that sort of approach behaviour. And look, I can't carry on without talking a little bit about this British Open Jiu-Jitsu. I
Oh
mean,
wow,
how
yeah.
long have you been doing that for?
Right, so I've only been training for 4 years now.
Oh
So
my,
I'm competing in the Masters 3 age group, so over 40s.
okay.
So yeah, yeah, training for four
Mhm.
years. Almost sorry, I did play rugby as well when I was younger. So I played that sort of
Okay.
semi-professionally, kind of for a year or so. But I was and over the years, I've just missed that that competitive
Mhm.
element. So I started training 4 years ago. I competed at the Yorkshire Open 3 weeks ago, and then it's the big one at Loughborough Uni on Sunday. So yeah, really looking forward to it.
And so, come on, a sports psychologist who's competing in a what is a big competitive arena. What's your what's your process? What's your thoughts going into Sunday? Where's your narrative, mate?
Yeah, my narrative is really focusing on the training that I've had, the good preparation that I've had, and and believing that I'm as prepared as I can be now, and that when it's called the bullpen. We need to be in the bullpen at 12. I'll be at 12 o'clock on Sunday, and when I'm there, just believing in that, and that I'm going to try my hardest. I'm going to give it my all. I'm not going to give in, and be happy with whatever happens. That's I think when I was younger, I certainly didn't have that approach, particularly with the tennis, and now as I've got older, and obviously I've spent a bit of time studying and researching sports psychology, that my mindset is changing a little bit. So yeah, and yeah, but like I'm just gonna just do my best and enjoy it.
I think the name bullpen kind of puts me in a threat response
Yeah, yeah.
automatically. I'm not too sure I'd like fancy
No,
stepping into
I
that one,
must
mate.
admit, when I got the email about my competition times, it certainly did evoke that little threat, because ultimately I know how I'm going to be feeling in that moment just before I'm about to go on and compete. And I guess with jiu-jitsu, it's the pressure of competition, but also I guess the physical danger of it, and you can get hurt and you can get injured, but of course I'm putting that to the back of my mind, but it is there, and I'm trying to think about what I want to be thinking when I'm in that bullpen and that uncomfortable environment, which it is
Mm,
uncomfortable. Once I get onto the mat and it gets started, I know I'll be fine. But it's that
mm.
anticipation of being squashed up within, and they're not very big either with the other competitors. So
Your narrative reminds me of something I spoke to Amy Williams about on the Sports Psych show. She talked about the 2010 skeleton gold medalist. She talked about leaning on her preparation
mm,
going into her final there, and uh, building and broadening her confidence as a consequence of her thorough preparation. And that's where her narrative was going into that final. It's when you've prepared thoroughly, it's such a great source of confidence or self-efficacy, isn't it,
yeah,
which can lead to that challenge
yes.
response rather than threat response.
Absolutely, and that's another. Yeah, and I will be trying to generate this, the challenge response by focusing on, what I want to achieve, what I want to do, what my game plan is, and certainly not thinking about the potential for injuries and loss. And another thing that I think is really helped me is the quality of my coaches that I've got. I travel sort of 45 minutes to an hour to go to a really good gym, and work with some really really good people, and that helps fulfill me with confidence too.
As a professor of sports psychology, again, I just want to go a bit more granular on what you've just said there. As a professor of sports psychology, who we're going to go on to talk about your
Yeah,
book, which is for sports coaches, but um, you said you've had really positive experiences with the coaches that you've engaged with. Tell us a little bit more about that. What positive experiences have you had? What have you been impressed by, and what's helped?
yeah. I've been really, really impressed by the knowledge of the coaches, and I guess partly the technical aspects, but also kind of how they're telling the narrative of what we're trying to do. So an understanding that although Brazilian Jiu Jitsu just looks like people rolling around on the ground, it's highly technical, and it does take years to understand what you're trying to do. So my coach will say, right, I could have told you this piece of information 2 years ago, but you wouldn't have understood it. I can see now your level of understanding is getting up to a level where I can actually start telling you more and more information. And I think that's just, it's just, invaluable information. And it's, I'm really getting into the training and enjoying it, but it's also the learning, the learning of how you as a person respond under pressure. Because there's no more pressure than having a, 90 kilogram person, sitting on your chest and squeezing you and you can't breathe. You're a bit tight about, but then it's about engaging in that thought process. And my coaches have really helped me, to think about those sorts of things. I guess just their openness as well, to embrace new ideas. So one thing, I'm dyslexic, so I really struggle to kind of understand lots of information at once. So one thing that we do is we record key sessions, key training, and then I then go away and then I then look at it and I listen to what the coaches are saying. And for me, that's been such a positive, really positive. And the coach that I work with has kind of embraced that. And he's kind of really actually, he understands that people learn different ways. And now, we work together quite a lot of private lessons. He's kind of adapting everything towards me. And for me, it's just been, I think it's really accelerating my growth.
I think what you just said there is fascinating. I mean, what I picked up there from the beginning is the importance of knowledge as a coach.
Mm.
And that might sound like a really obvious thing to say. To be a good coach, you've got to know a lot about your sport. But actually, there are potentially a lot of voices in coaches who talk about, wearing your expertise lightly. And it's actually something that I'm not so convinced about. I think domain specific knowledge is really important. Is a key mediator in terms of coaching standard. That's just my opinion. You've talked about individual differences of learning, and it's interesting. One of the reasons that you're on, one of many reasons, is because Dr. Ed Cope introduced us, and he came on the podcast with Professor Chris Cushion, and he's come on a couple of times and talked about coach as teacher, essentially. And we talked about the work of Barak Rosenshine and his principles of instruction. And just listening to you, it sounds to me like your coaches have, whether consciously or otherwise, engaged in some of those principles of instruction for you, so guiding you and scaffolding difficult tasks related to you as an individual and the challenges that you bring to the table. Yeah, it sounds like they have been great instructors, great teachers. As a coach, would that be a fair thing to say?
Absolutely. So, I've played different sports, different levels, and I'd say he's up there with, one of the very best coaches that I've ever had, and mainly also because I think he's willing to share as well.
Okay.
He'll say that coaching is like teaching, teaching your pet dog how to bite you, because ultimately, if we're sparring and competing, that's what I'm going to be doing. And he's very open to that. Another really good coach I had was a golf coach, Peter Suplin, who played European Tour. I think he led the British Open once
What
for
was his name? Sorry.
Peter Tuplin.
Yes. Okay.
So
Yep.
yeah, and he was like that, a really good coach as well. So they're not just focusing on the technical element; they're looking at kind of you as a person more holistically, how you're feeling.
Yep.
And sometimes when they get to know you, gauging that certain days you're probably not going to be in, maybe in a good a mood, as good a mood as what you will be in other days, or receptive to. And they're just picking up on that, and I think that comes from when coaches get to know you fully as a person. But yeah, it's that intuition, that feeling they have.
Yeah. For the biopsychosocial side of things.
Yeah. Just so the other day we had in preparation for the British Open, we had a training session where my coach brought in, some of the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu athletes. Some of them were actually a couple of full time, trained full time, and he said as soon as you walked through the door, I just thought you looked tired and you didn't really look up for it. And I'd had a really bad night. I've got a toddler who's 1.5 who had not slept well that night, and I just thought it was pretty. It's really good that he was. You could see that from just because he knows me. You see, and I think it shows the importance of coaches getting to know their athletes and yeah, knowing what makes them tick or just I think it's just so important.
Well, Adam, this is this is the kind of stuff that I know you address in your upcoming book, Psychology in Sports Coaching. I say upcoming because I think by the time that this is released, I think it will be out, and people will be buying it by the bucket load, I'm sure. Adam, talk us through the genesis of this book. So as I say, it's called Psychology in Sports Coaching. Where did this come from? Where did it start? Give us a bit of a history.
Yeah, so we're now about to publish the third edition. So the first edition came from my work with a rugby coach. We could talk about this because I've
Yeah,
written a book with him, John
please.
Callard. We wrote a book called Focus
Mm,
for Rugby, and he approached me several years ago, and he was looking for someone kind of to support him as a
mm,
psychologist. And then we worked together over a number of years. I would work with him. He would bounce ideas off, tell me about particular players, and we'd come up with different strategies to help the players. And then I just thought that actually, there is nothing really out there for coaches. Well, there were several books, but nothing that I just thought there could be something different, and I wanted to address that gap. And also, I strongly believe that the best coaches are, they might not be trained, they might not be qualified, but are, the best
mm.
psychologists. They're the people who can work with people, they can influence people, they understand people, they get people. And so, and another thing that I believe is that, so we know that, the term psychologist is a protected term, and, coaches have to be careful what they do. But I wanted to create this book to show coaches, the parameters of what they can do so they can do it in a safe manner. And also to give them information to engage in psychology. And I don't just mean, teaching athletes mental imagery, which is in the book, and they can do that, but more about creating optimal environments, fulfilling the needs of athletes, making athletes, feel supported. So it's kind of and also if they're working with different populations, whether they're coaching a child athlete, they're coaching an adult athlete, what sorts of things do they need to consider, and how will that influence their practice? And also as well, let's think about the genesis of this. About 10 years ago, I worked with the Rugby Football League, and they had this program called Embed the Pathway. So the Embed the Pathway was a program about improving the quality of coaching within rugby league. They looked at Australia, they looked at what Australia did, and they identified, so tactically, physically, psychologically, all elements relating to coaching and how they can improve coaching. So as a psychologist, I was brought into the psychology part of this program and offered advice on how coaches can incorporate psychology within their coaching practice. So, for example, in the community setting, if you're teaching an athlete to, I don't know, pass the ball, which simple basic skills. Okay, so what happens if player A drops the ball and has to go around to the drill the next time? So my feeling was, right, okay, so the coaches use psychology, they would engage in positive self-talk. So provide positive messages to the players throughout the session. And in that way, trying to build up confidence, reducing anxiety among the grassroots community players. So all of those factors kind of, led to the creation of the first edition of the book.
So what I'm hearing you say there, Adam, I mean, I love everything you've said. What I'm hearing you say is, your passion is helping coaches incorporate psychology into their coaching practice, into their coaching environment. Um, I think I completely agree with you in terms of, I think coaches are in a brilliant position because they're on the grass, if you like, communicating with players all the time. They're in this position to be the most impactful psychologist within their role. I mean, something, and come back at me here if you disagree with my term here. Something I always say is, look, as a coach, you're not a sports psychologist per se, but you do a lot of psychology
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
biopsychosocial stuff within your role. In fact, it's constantly there. It's there every single second, right? So it stands to reason that as a coach, you'd want to be able to constantly look to update your skills and your competencies in this area. And so this historically, this is what you've been engaged in as an academic, as a practitioner, and this is what the book is all about. Helping a coach incorporate psychology from what you're describing there in granular detail. Is it? Have I read you right there?
Spot on it. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I guess it's really, like you say, it's to help the coaches maximize what they do. So and also maximize the impact of what they're doing. So like you say, coaches will probably spend time going on courses to potentially learn how to coach new skills or updating their CPD. And then I guess, but do they, or how many of those will engage in sports psychology and at this sort of level where they can really delve into particular topics, with a bit of depth, but also I've tried to maintain that applied focus, because each chapter has a case study in which I would put into practice what is the key messages from the chapter. And I think also, if coaches are running drills, they're running sessions, can they maximize them by just tweaking the way in which they give the instructions, the way in which they set up the sessions, they maybe ask for feedback, involve the players, and to really benefit both the players as well. So it's kind of hopefully benefiting the coaching sessions, which will then engage in, helping the players enjoy the sessions, also benefit what the coaching they receive, or improve it, sorry.
Yeah, and reading through your book, Adam, I mean, I think that there's a nice balance between the practical and the theoretical, and I think it's important often not to ignore the theoretical, because it does it helps coaches have a what, how, and why feel to their coaching practice. And going back to something you mentioned earlier in terms of, well, look, if a player makes a mistake, then you can help that player increase their positive self-talk after that mistake by you delivering positive sort of verbal persuasion, if you like, in your role as a coach, and underpinned theoretically by Albert Bandura's self-efficacy theory, for those out there who are keen spotters of the psychological theory of that kind of thing. Now, that might seem a bit OTT, but it very much helps a coach after sessions, after activities, after sessions, after games, be able to say, okay, well, what was I trying to achieve there? How was I trying to do it? And why was I doing it in that way? So you have that grounding, that evidence grounded or evidence informed practice. And so balancing that practical and theoretical side could be construed as pretty important.
Yeah, for me, it's absolutely vital. I think, we all know that there's, people out there claiming to be, well, maybe working as psychologists who are not trained or not registered with the HPC. And I think it probably differentiates us with them in the sense that we have this theoretical knowledge. And I think it's important that if coaches are, incorporating aspects of psychology, they have this understanding. They don't need to have it at the very highest level, but like you say, just this plan of why they're doing what they're doing. And I think for me, it's underpinning the messages that I'm given. The messages that I'm given are based on evidence. So every single chapter is packed full of the latest research. All of it is evidence based. It's not, something that I'm making up. There's evidence there to show that it works if it's delivered in the right way. And that's something that I'm really passionate about as a researcher myself. It's something that I've spent the last maybe 20 years doing now, developing evidence to inform practice. And for me as well, it's about getting the evidence out there. So there's lots and lots of sports psychology journals now. There's been a massive increase, but I think the main issues are, one is that coaches don't often have access to these journals because they're subscription only. And two, when they do, they're written in a language that potentially you might read a 5,000 piece of work when actually it's only the last paragraph which is of any use. So what I really try to do is condense the research and then link it to the applied findings, which I hope will be of use to sports coaches really, and others that are interested in developing performance.
Academic journals is something we've not really touched upon on the Sports Psych show, possibly because it's quite an explosive issue. But as you've kind of identified there, I mean, as somebody who contributes to academic journals, but also you're writing these kind of practical books as well. Just briefly here, are there other than writing books, do you think our profession, sports psychology, can do more things to help coaches engage with, understand, and then apply sports psychology? Do you think there's more things that we can do as sports psychologists, both in the academic sports psychs and consultant sports psychs?
Yeah, I think massively. I think the first key though is identifying. You know, it's difficult. It's those people who are the false prophets, the people who claim to be psychologists with no training. Because it only takes maybe one of those to give our profession a bad name. Yeah, yet they're not officially part of our profession. But in terms of what we can do, I think massively. I think there needs to be much more sports psychology based information, which is credible, evidence based information within coach education programs. I really think that's important, so that coaches can actually receive, I guess, a balanced and probably accurate information of how sports psychology can help them. But I do think it's difficult though, because I've heard lots of stories where Joe Bloggs turns up. He's a mind coach, but ultimately he has very, very little information that can be of benefit to anyone. Certainly not a professional team. Yet certain times they're getting into these positions, which I think is really, really damaging for our profession, and it is a concern, definitely.
Do you think, and everything you said there resonates with me completely, do you also think it's almost all of this is as a consequence of the profession that we're in? Dare I say this, what can be perceived as the intangible nature of it, in so much as, I mean, I do a lot of writing myself, and to strive to write as accurately as I can, and as evidence informed as I possibly can, I have to compromise with the writing. I can't just say, well, this happened on the pitch this weekend with this team, and the answer, the reason why this happened is because of this.
Yeah, sure.
Ethically, I can't necessarily say, well, Manchester City lost because of this reason, and it's all psychology. So there's an element of complexity there, and there's an array of individual and group differences, and there's potentially multiple answers, and so it almost dilutes the message. Whereas I suppose one could describe the popular psychology literature, the pop psych stuff, as this is the answer, this is the way. And so they benefit from getting away with being able to be quite one dimensional, rather than appreciating the multi-dimensional nature of behavior.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I've read quite a few pop psychology books, and it's just, yeah, sometimes I'm quite disappointed in the sense that they're offering that this is why this happened, when actually there could be, hundreds of reasons, and probably the reason they're offering is no evidence for it either. But
Mm.
just going back to that point you made, one thing, as a coping researcher, I read a really good quote once. It said, just because someone is failing to perform, it doesn't mean to say they're not coping with pressure. There are a number of reasons why they could be failing to perform. So technical, illness, dehydration, injury, other things going on inside their life. So it's really important to consider the whole reasons why. For
Mm.
example, a famous athlete may choke in a given experience. I remember reading about one book. They explain why a particular tennis player choked in a major competition.
Mm.
One, they don't know the tennis player. They've never interviewed the tennis player. They know nothing about the tennis player. So evidence based, they don't know why this tennis player choked. All they can do is guess. But that sometimes doesn't come across in these pop psychology books. It's this happened because this. Whereas, as an academic, or I guess as a psychologist, I wouldn't write like that because
Mm.
I don't know. And that is a bit of a bugbear, actually, in some respects.
Yeah, bound by ethics, bound by
Yeah.
confidentiality, and bound by informed practice or evidence-based practice. It makes it tougher for the sports psychologist to give succinct explanations in a world that really demands succinct or only
Yeah,
has time
yeah,
for succinct explanation, whether that's temporal or whether that's to do with the brain just loving simple explanations.
yeah. I agree with that. I've been. I'm sure you have as well. Been on media several times. There was one time it was when Hull City, the Phil Brown gave a team talk on the pitch. So I was approached by Hull Look North to come and give a talk on that, and I thought, well, one, I don't know why he did that. I don't know the impact it had on the players because I don't know any of them. And then two, if I did, I wouldn't be able to come and talk about that because of confidentiality. So it's this this ethical adherence, and so yeah, I just find that quite interesting, really.
Okay, so returning to your book, you're passionate about helping coaches incorporate psychology into their coaching practice, their coaching processes, their coaching environment, and certainly coaching environment is something I'm really, really interested in my own consulting work. So my eyes lit up when I got to the motivational climate section, that motivational environment section. Adam, so talk to me a little bit about this chapter, this section here. You're a consultant yourself. What do you think is important to understand? Because boy, this is a complex world, isn't it? The motivational climate world. It's nuanced. It's challenging to grasp. Tell me a little bit about this area.
So the research has identified two different types of climate. So there is the task climate in which coaches reward effort, improvement, and then we have the ego environment, which coaches will reward just the
Yeah.
best people and punish those who are losing and maybe not doing as well. And we know that it has a massive impact on athletes. I'm talking children, adolescents, and also adult athletes. So those who are involved in an ego involved environment, which only the best athletes are rewarded, are much more likely to experience anxiety. They're much likely to be less enthusiastic, and also display antisocial and violent behaviour. Furthermore, particularly among adolescents who are in an ego-involved environment, they're much likely to drop out. And it's thought that this is one of the reasons associated with this dropout rate. So, so personally, I think it's really important that this is something that coaches get right, and it's a way of incorporating psychology, which to me is not just about teaching mental imagery, positive self-talk, which I think are really important, but kind of the broader aspects of psychology and looking at the environment in which they're coaching. And
Mm.
it is the coaches who are responsible for the environment that they create. And I think having this understanding of what the different types of environment is the key before then to then trying to manipulate what you do as a coach in order to understand how you can make the environment better.
So we've got, in very simple terms, two types of motivational climate: an ego orientation and a task orientation. That ego is, again, in simple tones, about the win. It's other referenced. It's, we want to beat others. And then in that task orientation, it's more self-referenced, and it's more on that specific granular tasks, I suppose, that are more controllable to us. And my understanding, and what you lay out in this chapter, is that research is essentially saying, well, we might not ignore ego, and there are definitely going to be players who are achievement oriented in that respect. But really what the research is saying is, hey, come on, let's create this task environment, because that can develop confidence. It's better for retaining attention, and all these kind of psychological constructs that it helps. And so the coach's environment then is crucial. So, from what you lay out in the book, and if you were to walk into a Premier League club tomorrow, an NBA franchise, an NFL franchise, um, broad brush question, mate, but what kind of practices would you want coaches to engage in that's going to orient the environment towards task?
So ultimately, what regardless of what level of sport you play, but at that elite level, what we're wanting is people to be, turning up to the matches and being able to perform at their very, very, very best.
Mm.
And so there are a number of factors that can influence that. So during the week, you'd want them to be in an environment in which they feel safe, in which they feel able to, to take chances, because it's now enabling, it's these taking these chances which will ultimately lead to this, performing at this very, very high level. So you would want the coaches to be, focusing on the improvement of athletes. So speaking to, athlete X, right, we need, we need you to work on this, this, and this. By working on these, you will, this will help you get to your performance to this much higher level.
Yeah.
So I guess having an input into each individual athlete and really working towards helping them improve. And then also offering feedback on their level of improvement. If have they improved? If yes, brilliant. What is the next thing to work on? If they haven't improved, okay, why is that? How as a coach can I support you to get to that next level in this area that we have identified as a key aspect of your performance? And that's what, I think would really facilitate performance in any environment, but also at this high pressure, the elite end of sport, which is, as you know, is very, very unforgiving.
Yeah, well, we can explore that in a second. I mean, so I hear safety, as safe an environment as we can possibly create, and that probably incorporates everyone having a focus on improvement, more so, over and above. Gotta win, gotta win, gotta win. Safety is giving players opportunities to explore safe environment to be able to, I suppose, make mistakes and explore things without fear of punishment, and an environment that incorporates a lot of feedback, to give players a little bit more certainty about where they are with their game, and where they'd like to be and where they can be. Am I hearing you correctly there?
Yes, so that, and then also recognition. So recognizing, the extent to which players have improved in key areas, but then also considering as a coach the way in which you give your instructions, the pace of your instructions. So if I'm a coach and I'm asking you to, perform a specific technique or learn a new technique, are you understanding me clearly? Are you understanding kind of what my expectations are? Is there clarity in what I'm saying? So it'd be about questioning the athlete as well. So we're working on a new skill level, developing a real area of your game. And what are you understanding what I'm asking of you? Because if you're not, if as an athlete you're not understanding what a coach is asking you to do, well, then you'll never be able to achieve it. And I know this sounds very not wishy-washy but straightforward, but it is really important that players understand, I guess, their instructions or what's being asked of them, and why as well, the rationale for what they're being asked to do.
But I don't think it's wishy-washy at all, Adam, because I think there's actually compelling relationships here between, let's say, task orientation, and again, coming back to the stuff we spoke about with Dr. Ed Cope and Dr. Chris Cushion around coach as teacher. One of the Barrett Rosenshine principles is checking for understanding. I think what you're referring to there, and again, we can relate to this to your experience in jiu-jitsu with your great coaches, is coaches as teacher. It's laying out a philosophy of instruction that optimizes feedback, and so that helps players feel safer and more certain. There will always be uncertainty in these environments, and they probably can't be 100% safe all the time, especially at the very highest adult elite level. However, we can still strive to make our environments as safe and as healthy as possible. And I think the healthy is incorporating stretch, but scaffolding where appropriate, asking appropriate questions, checking for understanding, and so on and so forth. Again, am I reading you right there?
Absolutely. As someone who spent, I didn't get diagnosed with dyslexia until I was much, in adult life, and someone who spent, most of his school time, not understanding things that teachers were giving you. I think it's so important that you, as a coach, you make sure that athletes are, have that level of understanding. But also, kind of focus on this improvement. I think it's really important that athletes have this sense of every session they're going into, they've got something that they want to work on and they want to improve on, and that and also helping them and letting them know and recognizing their improvements to show that they are improving. Even if they've had a bad training session, it's about identifying, well, what aspect went well, what did you work on, what did you do well, and that's what we'll come back for tomorrow and work on that again tomorrow. So it's been positive with the athlete as well. It's this positive communication, as well as the pacing of the instruction that you give them. Another thing I think that's really good in this task-oriented climate is giving a bit of authority in terms of decision making to the athlete, empowering them. And we know that when athletes feel empowered, their basic psychological needs, their overall enjoyment increases. And obviously, this has to be within reason, and it would, as a coach, it'd be varied depending on the level of athlete, the age of the athlete that you're working with. If you're working with 6-year-olds, and you might not be able to give them as much authority as if you're working at a professional sport where essentially they would have vast amounts of knowledge, and giving them ownership of what they're doing can really be effective too, to make it more of a two-way conversation.
There's some very rich stuff here in terms of, and especially with relation to past guests and things that they've spoken about on the Sports Psych show. I mean, I'll go back actually recently to my conversation with Niels Feddersen around coaches appreciating the cultural aspects that drive player behavior or human behavior. And you talked about your, although this isn't a cultural aspect, very much an individual difference, but you talked about your challenges with dyslexia, but just going beyond the individual difference of a person, just looking at the cultural aspects is important, and is a part of that healthy and safe task orientation, isn't it? And what you've just mentioned there, having help or allowing players to be involved with some of the decision makers. I mean, I go back to my way back a couple of years ago in my conversation with Lara Mossman around being an autonomy supportive coach. We can think of psychological safety there and allowing players to participate to a degree. I just think it's fascinating stuff, and all of this feeds into a task-oriented environment. So there's some real crossovers and relationships across psychological constructs. One final question from me here. I mean, I've kind of alluded to this notion of, but we might still want to have some space for ego orientation and individual differences here. There are absolutely, I've experienced in the last 15 years, players turning up and saying, well, Dan, I just want to win. That's what drives me. That's what drives me in that lung-busting last 5 minutes. Does the research suggest that there needs to be space for that, Adam?
Yes, definitely, particularly at the elite level. So at the elite level, they do need this element of competition within teammates, within training, as long as it's managed. But that can have a positive impact on motivation. I think at grassroots level, the evidence is that it doesn't really help. So I'm talking about those 7 or 8 year olds who are learning a sport, that it doesn't help them at all. But at that elite level, there was a study with the volleyball players who found that they really needed that. They needed that competition. It helped drive them on. So I guess it's going back to knowing your players, knowing your team, knowing the environment, knowing what works for some players. Just a quick point you mentioned about the dyslexia. If I'm a coach and I'm giving a team talk, halftime team talk, and I know I've got a player in there who's dyslexic, if my team talk is 10 minutes long, I would need to question, maybe have a quick word with him and find out actually which bits, there's a high chance he won't have understood. The first sentence will have gone over his head, and then it will have continued going over his head for the next 15 minutes. So it's about really getting to know your players, knowing what works for them, and understanding them as individuals, and then maybe pulling them on one side and just giving them maybe a 30-second little pep talk about the key points for them.
I think if a team talk is 10 minutes long, then we also need to consider individual differences in working memory capacity.
Absolutely,
as well.
Yeah.
Hey, look, just dwelling briefly on something there that you said, I think is really, really important, because I don't think we do this enough, disseminate between grassroots sport and I suppose youth sport at academy level right the way through to developing elite and then elite. You mentioned that an ego orientation may be useful at the adult elite level, but less so in youth sport, and then probably not at all at 7 to 8 year olds. So, just if you can, just give us a brief summary of your thoughts. I mean, it sounds to me like if you were standing in front of a bunch of grassroots coaches, you would be very much orienting them towards that task orientation. Would that be right?
Yeah, 100% right. I really would be focusing on that because I think at such a young age, if there's 3 or 4 athletes within, I don't know, a football session, rugby session, who are continually getting praise, being told how brilliant they are, and you get the others who are dropping the ball, making mistakes, they just won't want to come back. So at that level, when it's more about, I guess, fun and enjoyment, or it should be about fun and enjoyment. I'm not sure when you go down to village football pitches on a Sunday morning, it is, and I think that's probably another show is that. But 100% at this level, it is about that creating that fun and focusing on players' improvement, because I just don't think it's there sometimes.
I suppose it requires a bit of striving to help coaches at grassroots level who, let's just say, insist on sort of engaging 12, 13, 14 year olds in a winning mentality in
Yeah.
inverted commas, and feel that's part of their role, which ultimately coaches can have that philosophy if they so choose to, but maybe it's helping them do some mental gymnastics around it's less about the win, and it might be that there's nothing wrong with striving to win, but it's helping players orient towards the striving to win rather than the winning in and of itself.
Yeah, and I think there's ways in which you can go about that. It is fun to win. Kids are going to love going out and winning, but it's how you do that. So what you do in training, so you can still create this task environment. So if you're focusing on effort, you're focusing on improvement. That should still lead to a superior team performance. So it actually does increase the likelihood of a team winning. But as a coach, you just don't emphasize that to your players. It's yeah. I think that's the way I would look at some of the literature I've read.
Yeah.
So for me, we work hard. The message of the coach would be: we work hard, we try our best, and then I'm not going to shout at you if you're losing, if you're making mistakes, because that's not part of this environment that we want to create.
Grassroots 101 there. Now, there's another topic that I'd love to dive into before we finish, and that's player leadership, which I just think is something that is important, crucial, fascinating. I must be honest that I think that a lot of the conversations I have with coaches, and that's maybe say at the collegiate level or the developing elite level, is often them sort of saying, "Oh, Dan, there's no leaders. There's no leaders anymore." Or even at the very highest level, if you like, "Oh, there's no leaders anymore. Why is there no leaders?" And often I find myself saying, "Well, let's look at the history of this player or these players. Have they had the opportunity to learn how to lead?" I think we can be we can very much focus on a player has leadership qualities or doesn't have leadership qualities. We want that big, loud centre back on the pitch, if we're talking soccer here, to dominate the game with his or her voice. But I think as sports psychologists, we'd say, well, have we put into practice processes that help players learn how to lead? I know this is a passion of yours. What's your thoughts here, and where do you go with the chapter in this book?
Yeah, so the chapter is really kind of identifying, what leadership is, what developing athlete
Mm,
leaders is about, but then also considering the different roles. So it might be that within leadership, an athlete
mm,
leader is a different role. So there's the technical leadership, there's being an ambassador for the team or the club, uh, social leadership, bringing the players together. Uh, and so sometimes the way, the research is suggesting that actually you wouldn't necessarily just appoint one leader. You would look at what you want
mm,
your leaders to be. And then you would then think, right, who can I pick as a technical leader? He
mm,
might be the leader on the pitch. But actually, he's not very good socially at bringing people together. But there is another player
mm,
who's really good at that. So then you bring them on board
mm,
to take on that role. And then what you start doing is working with the leaders as a coach, spending time with them. So you look at, first of all, what is their role. So developing and working with the athletes who you've selected, who you think have some leadership areas, whether it's technical, social, ambassadorial, identifying what you'd like from them to do, and also getting their opinion on what they think they could do, and then start actually cultivating their leadership skills, spending time with them. If you think, you want to work on a specific skill, you would spend time with that athlete. So I think leadership should be no different. You should spend time with the athletes one-to-one, or with the athlete leadership group, and then working on those skills. So having meetings, team meetings, providing regular feedback on his or her leadership.
Is there an I'm thinking again about some of the conversations I'm having, let's say at grassroots level or youth academies, and they might sort of suggest that, okay, that's all very well, but there's no time for that. Do you feel, whether through the research evidence or whether through your own consultancy practice, which I know goes hand in hand, but are there opportunities for coaches, do you feel, to do this on the grass, on the pitch or the field?
Yeah, I think time is a massive issue, and it's
Yes.
their time is limited. Very, very limited time with athletes, and I think there can be ways in which this could be adapted. I think it's really important that there is flexibility in this. So instead of having a meeting, it could be just pulling them aside for conversation. So for example, you saw one of your players give some excellent leadership behaviour. Pull them aside, excellent leadership behaviour. Explain why what they did was excellent leadership behaviour, what you're wanting from them, and maybe how they can develop in a further. So it necessarily doesn't have to be meetings if there is that lack of time, particularly at the lower levels where maybe athletes are still amateurs but actually still competing at a very, very high level. And then also considering the environment which you work in to kind of help the leaders flourish by giving them, this accountability, this responsibility. But again, you make a good point. If they've not had experience or had opportunities to do this in the past, you've got to be very patient with them.
So you almost feel it could actually be identified within that task orientation, couldn't it? That,
Yeah, definitely.
Part of the task orientation is to learn how to lead.
Yes.
And when we learn how to lead, we give ourselves a better chance of winning if we're going to relate it to the ego orientation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also another key aspect is allowing players to kind of reflect on what they've done, and things that have gone well, things that haven't gone well, and what they would do in the future. And that can be a 5-minute conversation, once or twice a week, or at critical points. I think there's lots of ways that developing athlete leaders can be done in the limited time that some coaches have with their athletes. But I think it's very important because we know it has an impact on team performance, and I guess the well-being of athletes as well.
And just to reinforce, so technical leadership, ambassadorial leadership, and social leadership?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Does that come from research?
Yeah, that's some of the research by Brock in 2020. They interviewed 11 Division 1 collegiate coaches about the key roles that leaders play.
Ambassadorial, what does that actually mean?
So, for example, if there are any media responsibilities,
Gotcha.
there will be key people who you would, just because an athlete is very good at leading on the pitch, he might not necessarily be the person you want representing the team. It just might not be his skill set.
And I suppose the technical leadership, are you saying that's leadership via action, the actions they engage in, or leadership via sort of communication of the actions they think others should engage in?
Yeah, I guess it'd be a bit of both,
Yeah.
but the key would be this actions that you think other teammates would want to be
Yeah.
doing. So tactical and technical
Yeah.
awareness. So kind of linking in with their coach really well, really.
Yeah.
And then forging this collaboration between teammates as well. So on the pitch.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, look, absolutely fascinating conversation. Where can people get hold of this book, and if you'd like to be found, where can you be found? Do you do much social media? And how can people get in contact again if you'd like to be gotten in contact with, Adam?
Yeah, certainly. So the book is available from all good bookshops and some rubbish ones too. Amazon, Routledge. It's published by Routledge, so it's available on their website. I've just joined Instagram, so my name is A plus Nick. That's APLUSNIC. And my contact email is a.nichols@hull.ac.uk. If you just Google me, my webpage will come up, and I'd be happy to hear from people if they've got any questions, comments. Yeah, it'd be great to hear from that. And that's, I think that's, I write these books. You want, people to understand them, and if they've got questions, yeah, that's amazing. I'd like to help people if they want any advice.
Absolutely. And you mentioned you just signed up for Instagram, and I know that you're keen to launch this book, to do a mega giveaway. So tell us a little bit about. I think you're going to give some books
Yeah,
away, a bit of a competition. So tell us a bit about that.
yeah. So it's a prize draw. I've got the publishers have given me 10 free copies. So if you want to join the prize draw, if you follow me on Instagram, and I'll be putting a post up, free prize draw competition, and if you like that post, and I will do a prize draw within a few weeks of the podcast going out, and then I'll announce the winners, and then I will post your copy of the book out to you if you're one of the 10 winners.
Awesome, exciting stuff. So follow Adam on Instagram to win one of his books. It's a Bible. It's a Bible of the theoretical and applied sides of sports psychology. So I thoroughly recommend that you do that. Adam, what a great conversation, and I absolutely wish you the best of luck in your jiu-jitsu. Get in that challenge state, mate.
Thank you very much, Danny. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. Absolutely, yeah.
Well, thanks. And everybody, that was Professor Adam Nicholls. I really enjoyed that podcast. And I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via Twitter or via Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.